Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rechak Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Hosea, the first chapter, or the 11th chapter. Too many ones on here. but pretty much as you can see, it says God yearns over his people. Right, so a continuation here as Hosea continues to prophesy to Israel, to the northern kingdom, concerning the words of the Lord against them. So this is Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. When Israel was a child, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. Now, this is referring to the beginning, right? When the early years of the nation of Israel, i.e. being in Egypt, first, obviously the patriots, right? Jacob and his sons having, migrated, so to speak, right, to Egypt at the behest of Joseph, and then dwelling there for a time. And that's where we basically became a nation, right? Became a people over there. So that was like that was like Israel being a child, right? The youth, the early stages. Today, you would look at America's youth as like the 13 colonies, right, around that time. So as it says, then I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. All right. And so that's why it references that, which was when the Lord had Israel delivered out of Egypt by the hand of Moses and Aaron. As they called them, so they went from them. All right. And now the they here being the prophets, right, because they are the messengers or the voice of the Lord. So the more the prophets called on to Israel, right, and exhorted them to return to the Lord, the more they went away from them. Okay, now, quick precept to exemplify this is in Isaiah, the 30th chapter, specifically around, let's see, Isaiah chapter 30, verse 9. And as it reads, that this is a rebellious people, referring to the children of Israel, lying children, children that will not hear the law of the Lord, which say to the seers, see not, and to the prophets, prophesy not unto us right things, speak unto us smooth things, prophesy deceits. Get you out of the way, turn aside out of the path, cause the Holy One of Israel to cease from before us. See, and so this was like that attitude, that energy. And there was a precept, I thought it was in this chapter, but it mentions how they pull the shoulder, right, as if you try to grab somebody by the shoulder to turn them around or to get their attention, and they just pull their shoulder away from you. And that was basically Israel. So as it's being mentioned here, the more that the prophets called on to them, right, the more they went away from them, the more they went towards, as it says, they sacrificed unto Baalim, okay, the lords of the nations, the other gods, which really are idols made with the hands of man, and burned incense to graven images. Okay, and so these two are just the same point being reiterated, right? They sacrifice unto these idols, burn incense unto graven images, and the graven images is like something carved. Okay, it's an image because it imitates something, right? Whether it's a bird or an owl, or a head, right? That's like an image of something, and it's graven because it's cut out or carved. And then usually they will coat it in like gold or some form of precious metal. I taught Ephraim also to go, taking them by their arms, but they knew not that I healed them. So what you'll see in this chapter is the Lord uses a lot of similitudes, right, to represent his relationship here with Israel. So here in verse 3, he's likening it onto a father who is raising up their child, right? So as it says, I taught him also to go, like basically how to walk, right? How to step, how to go in the right way, taking them by the arm. So like a child, when they start walking, the parent would hold their hand, right, to guide them lest they fall or go in the wrong direction. And so that was what the Lord was saying here. And the way he did that, obviously the way it manifested was by way of sending the prophets, right? Giving us law, statutes, and commandments, giving us guidance, giving us a land, and basically setting us up to be able to grow and live in the right way, like to a child being led of their parent in the right direction. But they knew not that I healed them, right? So they didn't, with all the things the Lord did, right? Israel didn't acknowledge, right, or even recognize that the Lord was the one who was nurturing and taking care of them. Verse 4, I drew them with cords of a man. So now we start to get into like a different similitude here, where the Lord likens Israel into like a cattle, right, or a heifer, and he would be like the the shepherd or the plowman who was taking care of this heifer, right? It says, I drew them by the cords, with cords of a man, with bands of love. So the cords and bands here are like the rope, right, around the oxen's neck, right? So you would lead it, right? Similar to today, if you want to lead a horse, right? You have the headpiece, right? And then you have a rope or something you can hold on to guide it. So the Lord said here, right? I drew Israel with cords of a man and bands of love, not of like there's a different way you would guide an animal, right? Like a cow or cattle, if it's being, say, rebellious, right? It wouldn't be with like bands of love. It'd be a more like aggressive sort of headpiece, because the muzzle, right, that they put on these animals, it's not just around the outside part of their mouth, right? There are parts that hook into the inside. For example, if you look at a horse, it's designed in such a way that there's a reason why when you pull to the right, it turns to the right, or to the left, it turns to the left, because it's actually attached to certain nerves in its mouth, so, or jaws, that are sensitive and allow you to have control over it. But here the Lord is saying, I wasn't, when I directed you in the way to go, likening you onto that cattle, it wasn't with these like sort of aggressive means, right? But more of like a gentle manner. And I was to them as they that take off the yoke on their jaws, and I laid meat onto them, right? So here the image that's being painted is likened onto one who cares so much about his cattle here, right? That he takes off the yoke, right, so that it can freely eat, without any restriction or anything on its neck or its mouth. So that's what he's likening this onto. So like, I took good care of you. In other words, is what the Lord is saying here. Verse 5, he shall not return into the land of Egypt, but the Assyrian shall be his king, because they refused to return. And what this means is, when you go back into, around this time period, you had a lot of Israelites that were, of course, they were serving the gods of these other nations and so on and so forth. But there was still, even at this time, places in Egypt that Israelites would be able to flee to for refuge or even migrate to. Okay. And they knew about these places, obviously, because they came from Egypt. And from this time going on throughout, into the future, Egypt wasn't a foreign place to Israel. But as the Lord is saying here, ultimately, when I bring that judgment, you're not going to be able to run to Egypt, right, and go there for help or return back to that land. You're going to be carried off by the Assyrians, right? And the Assyrians are going to be your rulers, which we saw and happened. And one example of this desire to go into Egypt was when you read in the book of Isaiah, right? It's mentioned there, but also in the book of Jeremiah, right? We see that when the Babylonians come and they ransack Jerusalem, all that chaos, and Jeremiah is then held captive, right? We have these individuals that come up to him, right? This group, and they're like, ask of the Lord whether we should go to Egypt or not. And then Jeremiah goes and asks, and the Lord says, no, you're not going to Egypt. And then they say, oh, well, we don't care anyway. We're going to go to Egypt, and we're taking you with us. And then they end up taking Jeremiah along with them. So, that going to Egypt wasn't a foreign, at least back then, place to them, right? In fact, you had Israelites that would go there. But the Lord is saying here, you wouldn't have that chance. I'm not going to give you that leeway. You're going to be sent to Assyria. Okay, and why? Because they refuse to return. So because you refuse to turn back to me, I'm going to send you captive under these people. Verse 6, and the sword shall abide on his cities and shall consume his branches. Now keep in mind, when the Lord mentions the sword on the cities, it's usually in the form of war, right? Or being attacked or being overtaken by another nation. Because in the ancient world, when they went to war, it was with swords, shields, spears, bows, and arrows. So typically the sword represents that, right? Going to war or, that kind of physical conflict there. And so, as the Lord said, the sword shall abide on his cities, which ended up happening, and shall consume his branches. Okay, and here, the branches would be likened on to, like the people, right? The children, the women, the houses, the cities, all of that. And devour them because of their own counsels. So what were their counsels? Their counsels were to seek after the gods of the nations, right? Their counsels were to disregard the message of the Lord, the word of the Lord, no matter how many times he sent prophets onto them, right? So their counsel was to go in the way of wickedness, and because of that, the Lord would bring this judgment upon them. And my people are bent to backsliding from me. And that bent is like a short way of saying hell bent, right? When you say somebody's hell bent on doing something, like they're clinging to this thing. And I think it was either in the book of Amos or it might have been in Hosea. I explained, right, like backsliding was an actual thing, right? It's a thing that the animals do, where if you are trying to pull it in one direction and it doesn't want to go, it'll plant its feet and it'll actually push itself back, right? It'll try to slide back. If you're trying, even dogs do that, when you have a leash on them and you're trying to get them to go one way and they just plant their feet and they're resisting you going the opposite way. Okay. So the Lord is saying here that my people are like hell bent on just backsliding from me, right? I'm trying to lead you in one way, in the right path, and you're just constantly resisting and pushing yourself in the other way. As it says, though they called them to the Most High, none at all would exalt him. So the Lord sent prophets to come and call you to return to the Lord, liken unto you trying to bring that animal one way, but none of them would exalt him. None of them would acknowledge the Lord and honor him, right, as the God of Israel. Verse 8, how shall I give thee up, Ephraim? How shall I deliver thee, Israel? How shall I make thee as Admah? How shall I set thee as Zeboim? Mine heart is turned within me. My repentings are kindled together. And here we see in verse 8 and 9, right? This is like a conflict, right? Almost, that you could say, and where, Amos is prophesying this, but it's like, it's still the message of the Lord to say, like, the Lord is Israel is forcing the Lord's hand, and he is like reluctant, right, to have to do this to Israel, but because of the wickedness, that they have done, the Lord has to bring that judgment. So it's like when you have no option but to punish a loved one, but you love them so much that it's conflicting. And so that's why there's this sort of questioning, right, in the 8th verse, like how am I supposed to give you up, into captivity? Like, how am I supposed to deliver you, being the one that took care of you, that raised you, right, as we read in the first few verses, and brought you up? How then am I supposed to make you as Admah and Zeboim? And these were some of the neighboring cities of Sodom and Gomorrah that were also destroyed, right? So that's what the Lord is saying. Like, your actions are warranting these judgments, and yet, like, I can't bring myself to just bring this full destruction upon you. As it says, my heart is turned within me, my repentings are kindled together, right? That compassion and love the Lord has is counteracting, right? And this is obviously not it's not on the same level as like man, right? As man, has these conflicts of emotions, right? But the point of this being mentioned is to emphasize and show, right, that love that the Lord has for Israel, which is why it's not like the Lord loves to just bring judgment upon Israel. Okay. So as it says here, verse 9, I will not execute the fierceness of mine anger. I will not return to destroy Ephraim. So, you imagine, like, say, a visual where somebody that you love does something so crazy and outlandish that really in the moment they just deserve like a slap, you know what I'm saying? Like a straight slap to the ground, and yet you lift up your hand, but and then, they just like flinch, and you just can't bring yourself to really just like give them that full swing, so you just like hit them on the hand or something like that, or in the back of the head, rather than what anybody else would have received. Right. So that's like a visual here, right, of the Lord lightening that judgment, as he says, I will not execute the fierceness of mine anger. Similar to how I believe there's a precept that mentions the Lord punishing Israel in measure. Okay, not as not to go overboard to completely destroy his people. So as he says here, I will not return to destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man. All right. And similarly, right, I mean, as the Lord said, he is God and not man. So he doesn't, operate in the same way man does, being that he already promised that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right, he made this promise onto them about their seed basically being sure and being multiplied and gaining this kingdom. So how then should he turn around and completely destroy, as it says here, Ephraim, right, being a part of that seed? The Holy One in the midst of thee, and I will not enter into the city. Right. So that entering into the city here, it's not like the Lord is saying, I'm going to stand at the gate and just never walk in. But what he means by that is I'm not going to bring destruction, right, utter destruction upon you, right, within your cities here. So to make this all clearer, right, if we look at a couple of other wordings here, so NKJV, for example, says here, I will not execute the fierceness of my anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come with terror. See, my NLT, and I will not come to destroy, which is what is meant by enter into the city. Verse 10, they shall walk after the Lord Yahweh. He shall roar like a lion. When he shall roar, then the children shall tremble from the west. Now, when we get to verse 10 and 11, this is more on the prophetic side. Okay. And you'll notice this pattern within the writings of the various prophets, where they'll mention things that are current, judgments that are coming, but every now and then they'll sprinkle in this sort of hopeful future, right? At some point, this is going to happen. In the midst of all this, you're going off, you're doing this, but it's okay, because there's going to come a point in time where the Lord is going to make everything okay. So one example here, as the Lord says, right, it says, they shall walk after the Lord, which is to say, like, there's going to come a point in time, there's going to come a day where Israel is no longer going to be going in the way of these other gods and committing this wickedness, but rather they'll walk right after the ways of Yahweh Ba'asham Yahweh Shai. As it says here, now you see these colons here, right? If you look this up, what does a colon mean in the Bible? No, not chapter and verse. Yeah. So here it says here, yeah, this is the part we're looking for. So it says, in some cases, the colon can be used within a verse to indicate a connection or explanation between two parts of a sentence. So as you can see, it says a colon can also be used within a verse to indicate that the second part of the sentence explains, clarifies, or builds upon the first part. So when you read these scriptures here and you come across the colon, keep in mind, let's see, where was it? Yeah, this is one of them. This is one of them. Keep in mind that that's what it's doing. The colon is there to say, because sometimes you'll see a colon at the end of a verse And then the next verse continues. So it's to say the next verse is either building upon or explaining or related closely to the verse above or the section, preceding that colon. So here, right, they shall walk after the Lord. He shall roar like a lion. When he shall roar, then the children shall tremble from the west. So that there's going to come a time where the Lord is going to roar, and that roaring is going to come with the fierceness of his wrath. Okay, and that is going to cause, as it says, the children shall tremble from the west. Now, when you look at Israel, the map of Israel, so you look at ancient Near East map, the west here is referring to now. Okay, because when you look at Israel on the map here, this portion here where Israel is at on the west is the Mediterranean. Okay, so and the children of Israel were not obviously dwelling in the Mediterranean, or as in bulk as a nation weren't really dwelling here. You had certain Israelites here in Europe and Greece and so on, but the West, is really here, like in America, where both Israel and Judah are. Okay, and it would be the roaring or the fierceness of the wrath that the Lord will bring upon this place that will lead to the trembling, right, of the children, and also leading into that repentance, right, that turning back, all right, and ultimately walking after the Lord, right, which will start with the elect of the nation of Israel. Now, leading into verse 11, it says, they shall tremble, right, as a bird out of Egypt, and as a dove out of the land of Assyria. And I will place them in their houses, saith the Lord Yahweh. So once again, how do we know here that this is prophetic? Because it mentions them trembling as a bird out of Egypt, right, and as a dove out of the land of Assyria. And we know this is not really referring to the actual land of Egypt and the land of Assyria, because, for one, Israel at this point had already been delivered. They had already came out of Egypt. And number two, when they left the land of Assyria, they didn't come out of Assyria back into Israel. Okay, they left Assyria and came to the Americas and haven't gone back to the land of Israel. Okay, so the Lord didn't place Israel, the nation, back into their houses or back into the land post the time of the Syrian captivity. All right, this is something that's going to happen now, and that Egypt and that Assyria is in a prophetic sense really referring to Babylon, right, or America. So as it says, they shall tremble as a bird out of Egypt and as a dove out of the land of Assyria, and I will place them in their houses. So when the Lord brings that ultimate destruction, right, that brings that fear, that trembling, in that, within that process is going to be that salvation or that deliverance of Israel, right, or of the elect out of Egypt, right, and out of Assyria, being modern day America, and then the Lord is going to place them in their houses, right, which is taking them back to the Holy Land and planting them there to never be uprooted. Okay, and that's also referenced here in the book of Baruch, the 2nd chapter. Let's get that real quick. Right around the last few verses here. I'm just going to go straight to the point. Right, this is Baruch chapter 2, verse 33. It says here, in return, matter of fact, let me start at 32. Boy, just start at 31. And shall know that I am the Lord their God. Okay, we will go up to verse 30. For I knew that they would not hear me, because it is a stiff-necked people, but in the land of their captivities they shall remember themselves. Primarily here, being in this captivity. And shall know that I am the Lord their God, for I will give them an heart and ears to hear, and they shall praise me in the land of their captivity, and think upon my name, and shall return from their stiff neck and from their wicked deeds, for they shall remember the way of their fathers, which sinned before the Lord. And this would be the beginning of Israel walking after the Lord. And I will bring them again into the land which I promised with an oath unto their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they shall be lords of it, and I will increase them, and they shall not be diminished, right? So that's that And verse 35, and I will make an everlasting covenant with them to be their God, and they shall be my people, and I will no more drive my people of Israel out of the land that I have given them. Okay, so going back to Hosea 11 and 11, that's when the Lord places them back in their houses, i.e. back into the land, saith the Lord. Verse 12, and so, when you read these chapters, and this is why it's important to also know and understand history, because you can tell by what did and did not happen historically. And that can be an indicator, right, to help you decipher if something is more as prophetic or if it's historical, right? And sometimes it's both. But in this case, we know that in the historical timeline, verse 11 didn't take place, right? It didn't happen that way, as I described earlier. So now, verse 12, as it says, now verse 12 goes back to their present day context, right, in which Hosea is prophesying. Verse 12, Ephraim compasseth me about with lies, and the house of Israel with deceit, which is to say, like, the Lord is saying, like, everywhere I turn, I see them committing iniquity, right? Doing wickedness, because of lies come many things, So the lies is just like, it's just one, it just says lies, but that encompasses the idolatry they were doing, right? The frauding, the murder, the adultery, all of those things. As it says, but Judah yet ruleth with God, and is faithful with the saints. Okay, and when you read the book of Kings and you read the book of Chronicles, Second Chronicles to be exact, they are parallels, right? But from different perspectives. The book of Kings focuses more on the northern kings, the kings of the northern kingdom, and the book of Chronicles focuses more on the kings of the southern kingdom. And you will notice that there were more kings of the southern kingdom that actually followed the ways of the Lord and enacted that righteousness and were faithful to the Lord than that of the northern kingdom. Okay, examples being Josiah, Hezekiah, and I believe Jehoshaphat, right, and a few others as well. But anyway, that brings us to the end of the book of Hosea, the 11th chapter. Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rechak Wadash. Until next time, Shalom.